Hello, and welcome back to the reading of White Rage, the unspoken truth of our racial divide. We are finishing out the book today. We are finishing out the book. It has been a really intense read, a really good read, and I am so grateful for everybody going along with us and understanding, more about history and how that history is a continuation today. There's been some journal prompts and really challenged some things that you all have learned and known to unlearn that and relearn some new things. And I'm excited to see what this book does for your all's journeys as far as anti racism work and decolonizing work goes. So, to catch everybody up, we are going to be on page 154. It is finishing out the chapter How to Unelect a Black President. And let's just get started. In addition to blocking access to the polls, the GOP's strategy is to make the very function of government so distasteful and haphazard that only the most diehard idealist or craven partisans would even bother to vote. Congressional Tea Party members have bottled up legislation, confirmation hearings, and deliberations on pressing issues such as the economy, all to demonstrate how government does not and cannot function. Casting Obama as uncompromising and irrational, a Republican Congress shut down the federal government at a cost to the nation of $24 billion. They then blamed the president. Obama, one pundit declared, quote, is betting that the Republicans will have to fold under the pressure that he creates. He is betting that they have picked the wrong issue and that he will win by holding his breath. Understand the terms of the president's bet. Americans lose until he wins, end quote. These public servants seemed not to care what damage they did, not even to their own reputations. Indeed, that was just the point. Government, least of all under a Black president, just does not function. As public approval of Congress plummeted to the single digits, indeed, one survey found that, quote, Congress is less popular than hemorrhoids, jury duty, and toenail fungus, end quote. The result was that in the 2014 midterm elections, the United States had the lowest voter turnout since 1942. So many of those who had been mobilized and energized in 2008 were now disillusioned, demoralized, and in many cases disfranchised and most simply stayed home. The vitriol heaped on Obama was simply unprecedented, not least given the sheer scale of challenges he found himself confronting and the measurable success he achieved in doing so. Obama came to office with a nation perched on the edge of a financial abyss as foreclosures and the subprime mortgage crisis consumed $22 trillion in net wealth. The nation engaged in two endless, futile wars that had already caused thousands of American deaths, let alone the hundreds of thousands of Iraqi and Afghani ones. And even more injuries, and we're running up a $4 to $6 trillion price tag, and the nation having 16% of its population lacking health insurance. Obama's centrist solutions and utter lack of radicalism in the face of a recalcitrant and obstructionist Congress should have made him a hero to traditional Republicans. But just the opposite happened. By the end of his first term, the president had an 85.7% disapproval rating among the GOP. One progressive wrote, quote, you hate Obama with a passion, despite the fact that he is a tax-cutting, deficit-reducing war president who undermines civil rights and delivers corporate-friendly, watered-down reforms that benefit special interests just like a Republican. You call him a Kenyan. You call him a socialist. You dance with your hatred, singing it proudly in the rain like it was a 1950s musical, end quote. That hatred started early. I want to go back to this. There's been many thoughts and opinions about President Obama. I know that when he was elected, the first Black president, a lot of expectations as it would be, but we got to see that he was a president and a politician just like any other man was, and so very interesting to see it laid out exactly how he was in office. He cut taxes, absolutely. He reduced the deficit, absolutely. He undermined civil rights. He did. He played status quo. He was really good with respectability politics. Participated in the two wars. So a lot of things about Obama that technically would have aligned with the GOP, except that one piece about him being Black. That hatred started early. When Obama was just a candidate, the racially motivated threats to his life led to Secret Service protection well before he was even a frontrunner for the nomination. After he became the Democratic nominee, there quote, there was a sharp and very disturbing increase in threats to Obama in September and early October, at the same time that the crowds at GOP vice presidential candidate Sarah Palin rallies became more frenzied, end quote. The heated, virulent rhetoric led Michelle Obama to ask, quote, why would they try to make people hate us, end quote. In Obama's first year in office alone, there was a 400% increase in death threats as compared to those received by one of the least popular presidents in American history, George W. Bush. Facebook eventually shut down a page where hundreds answered yes to the question, should Obama be killed? The president's Twitter account was inundated with death threats such as kill yourself, you tree swinging nigger, and POTUS, you can count on me waiting for you in the parking lot. This that paragraph in itself is difficult to read, but I'm stopping here because so many people have said that messages like this and words like this, threats like this, started when Trump came into office. No, nor was it just the crazies. Respectable elements in American society actively tilled the hate-filled ground, lending an aura of authority to this campaign of terror. During the 2008 campaign, John McCain's strategists deliberately demonized not just Obama's policies, but also the man himself, who mystically morphed into this Muslim, black nationalist, socialist, foreign, Arab, Kenyan, un-American immigrant monstrosity straight out of the Manchurian Candidate. So vilified was Obama that the very office of the president ensured no respect. Breaking every rule of decorum and receiving millions of kudos for doing so, South Carolina Congressman Joe Wilson shouted at Obama, quote, you lie, end quote, during a 2009 joint session of Congress. In another unceremonious and unprecedented slap in the face, Speaker of the House John Boehner, Republican from Ohio, invited Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who had a contentious relationship with the president, to address Congress, but didn't inform the White House until hours before the speech. Boehner admitted, quote, keeping President Obama in the dark. I frankly didn't want them, the Obama administration and White House, getting in the way and quashing what I thought was a real opportunity, end quote, he explained. In another unceremonious and unprecedented slap in the face, Speaker of the House, John Boehner, invited Benjamin Netanyahu. I'm laughing because again, when we read this book, we come across things that just line up with today. So this is really good. This is a good piece to mention about Netanyahu. I hate that last name. Excuse me, I hate trying to pronounce that last name. The relationships or the interactions that he has had with the presidents prior to Joe Biden right now. It's been ongoing. This is a good message to pass along if anybody's struggling with some of the history with Israel and the United States. So just something to maybe come back to. Somehow, many have convinced themselves that the man who pulled the United States back into some semblance of financial health, reduced unemployment to its lowest levels in decades, secured health insurance for millions of citizens, ended one of our recent, all too intractable wars in the Middle East, reduced the staggering deficit he inherited from George W. Bush, and masterminded the takedown of Osama bin Laden actually hates America. One woman noted that there was a billboard on the interstate near her town that read, quote, the U.S. SEALs took out one threat to America. Let's vote out the other in November, end quote. Former New York Mayor Rudy Giuliani told an audience, I do not believe, and I know this is a horrible thing to say, but I do not believe that the president loves America. He wasn't brought up the way you were brought up, and I was brought up through the love of this country, end quote. Similarly, John Sununu, the former New Hampshire governor and an ally of Obama's 2012 presidential opponent, Mitt Romney, declared that he wished that, quote, this president would learn to be an American, end quote. The hatred of Obama even seeped into those sworn to serve and protect. One white Florida police chief joked, quote, at first I felt a swell of pride and patriotism while Barack Obama took oath of office. However, all that pride quickly vanished as I later watched 21 Marines in full dress uniform with rifles fire a 21 gun salute to the president. It was then that I realized how far America's military had deteriorated. Every damn one of them missed the bastard. End quote. One New Hampshire police commissioner was observed sitting in the local diner glaring at the TV as he kept calling Obama a fucking nigger. A dispatcher in Ohio proudly sent emails that Air Force One's new call letters were NI66ER. And in response to a friend's text that, quote, all niggers must fucking hang, end quote, a San Francisco police officer replied, quote, ask my 6-year-old what he thinks about Obama, end quote. Then there's Ferguson, Missouri, where the second in command of the police force exchanged a series of emails with his lieutenant and a court official in which one, quote, depicted Barack Obama as a chimpanzee, another doubted his ability as a black man to hold a job for 4 years, while a third labeled a photograph of a black tribal gathering Michelle Obama's high school reunion, end quote. Jelani Cobb wrote poignantly about the paradox of progress. Sadly, the ascent of a black man to the presidency of the United States did not, despite all the talk of hope and post-racial society, signal progress. Instead, it had led to this situation not so unlike the era of Jim Crow, where a sense of physical vulnerability is shared across classes in the Black community. A woman driving to her new job at a Texas college is pulled over for not using a turn signal, jailed, and then found dead in her cell. A former college football player is injured in a car accident, seeks help, and is shot dead by the police. A high school boy goes out to his house to purchase Skittles and iced tea, only to be stalked through the neighborhood by a man with a criminal record who is carrying a loaded weapon. The unarmed child ends up dead while that grown man is acquitted. A 12-year-old is playing in the park with a toy gun. Police kill him within 2 seconds of their arrival. A man merely makes eye contact with the police officer, and by the time he arrives at the jail, is nearly dead, neck broken. A 22-year-old woman is out with some friends when an off-duty police officer, thinking he sees something suspicious, fires into the crowd. The bullet slams into her skull and she dies. He is later acquitted. Even where the wound is not fatal, it is grievous. An endowed professor at Harvard is arrested for being in his own home. New York attorney and author Lawrence Otis Graham thought that teaching his children all of the rules of respectability, dress, clothes, hair, behavior in public places, and showering them with all the education, vacations, and stable home life that money could afford would provide protection. He was wrong. His son's routine walk to class at a boarding school in New England became something much more as a carload of whites drove by and sliced through the child with the epithet nigger as if it were a machete. Black respectability or appropriate behavior doesn't seem to matter. If anything, Black achievement, Black aspirations, and Black success are construed as direct threats. Black respectability or appropriate behavior doesn't seem to matter. If anything, Black achievement, Black aspirations, and Black success are construed as direct threats. Obama's presidency made that clear. Aspirations and the achievement of these aspirations provide no protection, not even the God-fearing. On June 17th, 2015, South Carolinian Dylan Roof, a white, unemployed 21-year-old high school dropout, was on a mission to, quote, take his country back, end quote. Ever since George Zimmerman had walked out of the courthouse a free man after killing Trayvon Martin and a racially polarized nation debated the verdict, Roof had looked to understand the history of America. Trolling through the internet, he stumbled across the Council of Conservative Citizens, the CCC, the progeny of the 1950s White Citizens Council that had terrorized Black people, closed schools, and worked hand in hand with state governments to defy federal civil rights laws. Its intentions on the web were cleverly masked, skewing the facts, rewriting history, and draped in the flag to lend an aura of authority and respectability. The White Citizens Council had tapered off during the late 1950s, but it had a rebirth in the 1980s, and in its new incarnation, became one of the go-to destinations for ambitious Republicans. The CCC's core values center on a Christianity that justifies slavery, embraces racial homogenous societies, and emphasizes Blacks as a, quote, retrograde species of humanity, end quote. But despite the group's avowed racist belief system, in the mid to late 1990s, as the Southern Poverty Law Center reports, quote, the group boasted of having 34 members who were in the Mississippi legislature and had powerful Republican Party allies, including then Senate Majority Leader Trent Lott of Mississippi, end quote. By 2004, Mississippi Governor Haley Barbour, the chair of the Republican National Committee, and 37 other powerful politicians had all attended CCC events in the 21st century. In 2013, it was discovered that Rowan Garcia Quintana, a Tea Party stalwart on South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley's reelection steering committee, was a CCC board member. Moreover, the Council of Conservative Citizens webmaster Kyle Rogers was a member of the GOP Executive Committee in Dorchester County, South Carolina, as recently as 2013. In addition, the Council of Conservative Citizens Chair, Earl Holt III, gave $65,000 to Republican campaign funds in recent years, including donations to the 2016 presidential campaigns of Rand Paul, Republican from Kentucky, Rick Santorum, Republican from Pennsylvania, and Ted Cruz, Republican from Texas. The CCC then enjoyed precisely the cachet of respectability that racism requires to achieve its own goals within American society. And its website of hatred and lies provided the self-serving education Dylan Roof so desperately craved. He drank in the poison of its message, got into his car, drove to Charleston, entered Emmanuel AME Church, and landed in a Bible study with a group of African Americans who were the very model of respectability. Roof prayed with them, read the Bible with them, thought they were, quote, so nice, end quote. Then he shot them dead, leaving just one woman alive so that she could tell the world what he had done and why. Quote, you're taking over our country, end quote, he said, and he knew this to be true. I was not that last chapter. The Rage, White Rage. If nothing else, the title of the book lends to the history of the relations between Black people and white people. It does lend into Latinas as well, but definitely Black people and white people. That last chapter talking about Barack Obama and how, again, on paper, if you were to take everything that Barack Obama did in office and have a white man step into that place, he would be heralded as one of the best presidents that we've seen. That's going to be the truth. If that were a white man that did what Barack Obama did, his legacy would be told completely differently. He would be looked at differently, but none of that mattered because he was Black. None of that mattered because he was Black, which is what really makes me think about people convinced that affirmative action affects Black people or helps Black people more. It doesn't, because even in places of power, it might get us somewhere, even though we know that it really benefits white women the most. But even while it will get us into a certain position or role, it doesn't change the way that we're viewed, the way that we're treated. It doesn't change the ways that racism rears its ugly and insidious head. If anything, the more success that we obtain, which is even more interesting because it's success by the measurements of white people. So when we meet what is considered successful, we're hated even more, because how dare we meet these standards that were met or that were placed? How dare we meet these standards that were put into place as an expectation to be seen as successful or worthy or valuable? There are people, that truly do not see the humanity of Black people, and they are among us. They're among us. They are not always going to be the people that are screaming out obscenities. They're not going to be the people that are looking to throw rocks at windows. They're doctors, they're teachers, they're politicians, they are CEOs. And it's important to be aware. A reason why I wanted this book to be read is because I want people, especially white people, to know what to look for, to see, to see it in your everyday life. If when you recognize it, you can't unsee it. You just can't. This type of thing is something that should be embedded in your head. If you can't unsee it, then I feel like you're not actually seeing it as much as you should. There is a hatred for Black people in this country. There's no denying that at all. There's no denying that at all. And having this book and seeing the history of everything, it is hatred for us for simply existing. We have never been even given a chance to do anything to actually earn the hatred that is thrown at us. I think that's so important to realize. We've never been given an opportunity. There seems to be an expectation that we're going to fight back, or that we want retaliation. Even if that were the case, we don't have the opportunity to do that. We've never been given the opportunity to do that because we're just continuously being held back, oppressed, hated, any number of things. And here we still are. The resiliency that Black people have is incredible, while it shouldn't be necessary. Uh, be gentle with yourselves after this book, after this chapter, and after reading this book as a whole, especially if you are on the Patreon community and you are a Black person. Really be gentle with yourself. It's heavy to hear this. It's heavy to read this. It's heavy to understand that what we face today has been going on. I am proud of you. I'm proud of you. I encourage you to share this book with the people around you. Something that is so important about this work with decolonizing and anti-racism work is that you pay it forward, you share it with your community. It is really easy to say, I didn't know this was happening. I didn't know what was going on, and then taking the time to understand it yourself. But if you keep it just for yourself, it is not going to provide the impact that is necessary. It is not necessary to wait for somebody in your life to mess up, although messing up does happen. But if you can mitigate that by sharing what you've learned with them, if you can mitigate that by educating them on what you've been educated on, that is how you not only continue effective change, but it is also how you build community. That is how you build the community that is necessary to continue this work, but then also just to be. Community is so necessary. I thank you all for being in my community here. I appreciate you. I mentioned that we're going to be moving to my grandmother's hands likely next week. If not, we'll take a week off. And we took a week off last week, but we'll be moving into it. My grandmother's hands is the book. I will put the author in the description when I put this up on Patreon. Again, I encourage you to use the comment section for community, going over what you thought with the book, any feelings that came from that, questions, anything along those lines. But I am proud of you, and I am thankful for you. And yeah, we did it, guys. We did it. All right. We will talk to you soon. Happy reading. I wanted to include the epilogue. I didn't include that before, so we'll just finish this out. Not even a full month after Dylan Roof gunned down 9 African Americans at Emmanuel AME Church in Charleston, South Carolina, Republican presidential frontrunner Donald Trump fired up his silent majority audience of thousands in July 2015 with the macabre promise, quote, "Don't worry, we'll take our country back." It's time instead that we take our country forward into the future, a better future. More than a century and a half of anger and fear have undermined American democracy, trampled on the Constitution, and treated some citizens as chattel and others as collateral damage. This didn't have to be. The land of opportunity did not have to be the land of missed opportunities. We, as a nation, have a choice. We've always had these choices, but instead of seizing the moment and moving forward, we have been diverted by the rage and the fear that have kept us spiraling in recurring themes of racism, discrimination, disfranchisement, illiteracy, and a thoroughly inequitable criminal justice system. It is time to diffuse the power of white rage. It is time to move into that future. It is a future where the right to vote is unfettered by discriminatory restrictions that prevent millions of American citizens from having any say in their own government. A poll tax in 1942 that led to only 3% of the voting age population in 7 southern states choosing elected officials was never a democracy. And neither in this decade is a voter turnout of 1.48% in Texas's statewide election. Moreover, the millions of dollars that Republican governors and legislators have spent on new voter suppression laws, purportedly to stop a voter fraud problem that never existed, while gutting health care, mental care, and education funding in already strained state budgets, suggests that the cost of subverting democracy extends far beyond the ballot box. The future is one that invests in our children by making access to good schools the norm, not the exception, and certainly not dependent on zip code. We know the consequences of dysfunctional school systems. We see the wasted lives such just as clearly as Eisenhower and Congressman Carl Elliott saw them during the Sputnik crisis. At that time, the political leaders chose to look away, to avert their eyes, as if leaving millions of children in segregated, decrepit schools did not undermine the hopes of America's smallest citizens, while also undercutting the strength of the nation as a whole. We can choose not to listen to the rage and instead craft a stronger, more viable future for this nation. We can ask tough questions such as why use property taxes as the basis for funding schools when that method rewards discriminatory public policy and perpetuates the inequalities that undermine our society. The future is one that takes seriously a justice system whose enormous powers are actually used to serve and protect. The misuse is storied, from the convict leased labor system to one that allowed known murderers to walk around scot free, to one that is now employed to undercut the gains of the civil rights movement. A program that stops and frisks predominantly those who are at the least likely to have illegal contraband is not law enforcement. A war on drugs that uses race and ethnicity as the litmus test for crime is not justice. Millions of Black citizens recognize this and therefore question the very legitimacy of this key pillar in American democracy. Meanwhile, state budgets have cracked under the strain of bloated, unsustainable prison systems. Mayors worry that their cities will ignite when yet another Black person, who is more likely than not unarmed, is killed by police. The cost of the continued misuse of the criminal justice system are more than the United States can bear, morally, politically, and financially. It is time to rethink America. Imagine if Reconstruction had actually honored the citizenship of 4 million freed people, provided the education, political autonomy, and economic wherewithal warranted by their and their ancestors' hundreds of years of free labor. If, instead of continually refighting the Civil War, we had actually moved on to rebuilding a strong, viable South, a South where poor whites too, for they'd been left out as well, could gain access to proper education. Imagine the educational prowess our population might now boast had Brown actually been implemented. What a very different nation we would be if all the enormous legal and political efforts that went into subverting and undermining the right to education had actually been used to uphold and ensure that right. If all those hundreds upon hundreds of millions of federal dollars poured into science education had actually rained down on those hungry for education, regardless of race, ethnicity, or income. Think about what a different national conversation we might be having, even as the economy turns ever more surely to knowledge based rather than watching our share of the world's scientists and engineers dwindle. Imagine if the civil rights movement had really resulted in Martin Luther King's beloved community instead of in a society that, to this day, willfully celebrates the very presidential administration that launched a war on drugs against its own people, who were neither mobilized nor addicted to begin with, a war on drugs that was manufactured out of a whole cloth for devious and self-serving reasons. Think about how different our cities and our rural areas would be without the scourge of drugs that had decimated families and communities. What if all the billions of dollars that have been diverted into militarizing police for a phony war and building prison after prison had been devoted instead to education, to housing, to healthcare? Imagine if, instead of launching into spurious attacks about his citizenship and filling the blogosphere with racist simian depictions, the United States had been able to harness the awe-inspiring symbolism of our first Black president, which had already led an Iranian and a Russian, among others, to see something in the spirit of America that surpassed even its material wealth. We shouldn't have to imagine. Full voting rights for American citizens, funding and additional resources for quality schools, and policing and court systems in which racial bias is not sanctioned by law. All of these are well within our grasp. Visionaries, activists, judges, and politicians before us saw what America could be and fought hard for that kind of nation. This is the moment now when all of us, Black, white, Latino, Native American, Asian America, must step out of the shadow of white rage, deny its power, understand its unseemly goals, and refuse to be seduced by its buzzwords, dog whistles, and sophistry. This is when we choose a different future. This is when we choose a different future.